Imagine you are a young lady-in-waiting at the magnificent court of Queen Elizabeth I. It is the height of the English Renaissance, and you are living at the center of the universe. The air in the royal apartments at Greenwich Palace hums with power, a heady mix of lute music, the scent of beeswax candles, and the hushed whispers of political intrigue. You stand against a priceless Flemish tapestry, watching as your queen presides over her court. She is an icon, seemingly carved from ivory and ice. Her gown, a universe of shimmering silk and pearls the size of robin's eggs, is a fortress of fashion. But it is her face that commands absolute awe. It is a perfect, flawless porcelain mask, untouched by time or emotion. In an age of pox and plague, her skin is a testament to her divine favor, a living symbol of the purity of her rule as the Virgin Queen. To you, she is less a woman and more a celestial body, around which all of England orbits. And then the order comes down, passed in a quiet, grim whisper from the senior mistresses of the robes. It is time for Her Majesty's monthly bath. A cold dread, far sharper than the palace drafts, settles in your stomach. This is the court's most terrifying secret, the moment the celestial illusion is violently dismantled. You are assigned to the ritual. You watch as 20 servants, their faces grim, haul bucket after heavy bucket of steaming water into the queen's private chambers. They fill a large wooden tub, carefully lined with fine Irish linen, not for comfort, but to prevent splinters from piercing the royal flesh. This isn't a spa treatment, it's an archaeological excavation. The queen enters, and as you help her disrobe, the full, horrifying truth of her beauty regimen is revealed. That flawless white face is a lie. It is a thick, layered, geological stratum of a cosmetic called Venetian ceruse, a toxic paste of white lead and corrosive vinegar. For 30 days, she is not washed. The medical belief of the era dictates that water opens the pores to pestilence and miasma, so each morning a fresh layer of the poisonous white paste is smoothed directly over yesterday's grime. Now you must witness the reckoning. As Elizabeth, the most powerful woman in the world, steps into the hot water, the illusion cracks. Literally. The ceruse doesn't gently dissolve. It softens and then peels away from her skin in ghastly grayish sheets, like ancient parchment flaking off a mummy. The water immediately transforms into an opaque, toxic slurry, and the smell that rises from the tub is an alchemical assault that makes your eyes water. The sharp, metallic tang of lead, the sourness of vinegar, and the thick, cloying odor of a month of unwashed human secretions, all blooming in the oppressive heat. This daily ritual of self-poisoning was a slow-motion suicide, driven by the crushing politics of appearance. The lead seeped through her pores, directly into her bloodstream and brain. You and the other courtiers have witnessed its effects for years, attributing them to the pressures of the crown. Her famously violent temper, which could erupt in a thrown shoe or a screamed curse, was fueled by lead-induced rage. Her crippling, legendary indecisiveness was a symptom of its neurological damage. It was a vicious, escalating trap. The lead caused her hair to fall out in patches, forcing her into the increasingly elaborate and heavy rigs that became her trademark, which in turn caused scalp sores and headaches. It rotted her teeth to blackened stumps, which is why she rarely smiled in public and learned to speak through barely parted lips. Most ironically, the poison puckered and grayed her natural skin, creating permanent blemishes that demanded an ever thicker, more opaque mask of the very substance causing the damage. The queen you serve is not a deity. She is a prisoner, trapped inside the myth she so carefully constructed, being slowly, agonizingly consumed by the very symbol of her divine purity. Imagine you are a high-ranking nobleman in the rowdy, masculine court of King James I in the 17th century. Your family, after a disastrous political misstep, has fallen precipitously from royal favor. Your entire future, your children's inheritance, the very survival of your family name, it all hinges on this one terrifyingly intimate private audience. You are dressed in your finest, most expensive velvet doublet, the fabric uncomfortably heavy as you sweat nervously beneath it. You've rehearsed your desperate plea for weeks, every word polished, every deferential bow practiced to perfection. You enter the king's private chamber, the air thick with the smell of spilled wine, roasting meat, and something else, a musky animal odor of unwashed bodies. You bow low, your heart pounding against your ribs like a trapped bird. This is your one and only chance to restore your family's honor before God's chosen representative on earth. Then, as you begin to speak, your voice trembling only slightly, you feel it, a faint, distracting tickle on your scalp. You try to power through, to focus on your carefully crafted words of supplication, but it is followed by another, on the nape of your neck, a phantom touch that makes your skin prickle. Then you feel a distinct crawling sensation in your meticulously starched and hideously expensive lace ruff. Within minutes, it becomes an undeniable, maddening, all-consuming torment. With a wave of pure, unadulterated horror, your mind connects the dots. The king, a man who famously loathed bathing and who often wore the same padded, unwashed clothes for weeks on end out of a morbid fear of assassins' daggers, is a walking, talking, human colony of lice. The royal furniture, the priceless tapestries, the very air of the room is thick with them, and they are now migrating onto you in a living tide of filth. You are being actively infested by the King of England while begging for your life. This was not a secret shame. It was a palace-wide epidemic, a normalized and grotesquely accepted state of being. These tiny parasites were not just a social nightmare, they were vectors for death. Body lice carried Rickettsia prevazicki, the bacterium that causes typhus, a brutal disease often called jail fever or camp fever. The crawling sensation on your skin was a potential death sentence. The entire court, from the highest lord to the lowliest scullery maid, was a hotbed for a disease that regularly killed more people than the era's incessant wars. And nowhere was this infestation more horrifically and fashionably concentrated than in the towering hairstyles of the court ladies. These were not coiffures, they were putrefying monuments to vanity and nests for vermin. A woman's hair would be caked and stiffened with a rancid pomade made from rendered bear or ox fat. This greasy, stinking foundation was then built up with pads of horsehair and wire frames, sometimes reaching 2 or 3 feet in height. This structure, which remained in place for weeks at a time, was a warm, dark, humid, and endlessly nourishing metropolis for fleas and lice. The rancid fat was a feast, and the intricate structure was a perfect nursery for their eggs. Some of the largest hair sculptures were even known to attract mice, who would nest within them at night, creating a truly living horror on a noble woman's head. To combat the incessant, maddening itch that would drive a sane person to violence, these paragons of fashion carried long, elegant scratching sticks, exquisitely carved from ivory and tipped with silver claws. It was an accessory of unimaginable horror, a beautiful tool for a disgusting, ever-present reality. Imagine trying to conduct diplomacy or engage in witty, courtly banter while fighting the desperate urge to claw at your own head, knowing that your scalp was a living, writhing ecosystem of parasites feeding on your blood. The crown itself, the ultimate symbol of authority, was crawling.
Imagine you are a foreign ambassador, arriving for the first time at the Palace of Versailles. You have traveled for weeks across a war-torn continent, your mind filled with awestruck tales of its impossible splendor. As you approach, the sheer scale of the building is designed to overwhelm you, a golden city rising from the French countryside, engineered to crush the ego and announce the absolute godlike power of its master, the Sun King, Louis XIV. You walk through the gilded gates, across courtyards so vast they could contain a small town, and finally enter the palace itself. You are plunged into a dizzying spectacle of life and opulence. You are guided through the Hall of Mirrors, its glittering, sun-drenched expanse reflecting 1,000 nobles dressed in a king's ransom of silk, satin, and diamonds. The air hums with the sophisticated melodies of Lully, played by a hidden orchestra, and the murmur of a dozen languages. This, you think, your senses reeling, is the apex of civilization, the center of the known world. But the sensory assault begins almost immediately. First, the smell. It is an overpowering stench of stale ammonia and active decay that cuts through the cloying clouds of expensive perfume like a sharpened blade. It catches in the back of your throat and refuses to leave. You try to breathe through your mouth. As your eyes adjust to the glittering chaos, you begin to see the details beneath the gold leaf. You notice the dark, damp stains blooming on the priceless silk wall coverings near the floor. You sidestep a suspicious puddle soaking into a magnificent Persian rug and realize with a wave of nausea that it's fresh urine. Then you see it, an act so shocking in its utter casualness that it takes your breath away. A duke, a man whose lineage is a litany of French heroes, turns his back to the crowd and calmly relieves himself against the marble base of a priceless Roman statue. No one bats an eye. It is as normal as breathing. This is the staggering, stinking secret of Versailles. With 10,000 residents, aristocrats, servants, officials, soldiers, and a near total lack of functioning toilets, the most beautiful palace in the world was in reality a magnificent gilded cesspool. This nightmare was the direct, albeit unintended, result of Louis XIV's political genius. He built Versailles as a magnificent cage, forcing his powerful, rebellious nobles to abandon their regional power bases and come live under his roof where he could watch them. He turned them from feudal warlords into domesticated, gossiping courtiers, their lives revolving around the chance to hand him his shirt in the morning. He controlled them utterly, but the logistical fallout was a sanitary apocalypse. Corridors became public latrines. Courtyards became dumping grounds for the contents of chamber pots hurled from windows above. The grand staircases, including the ambassador's staircase itself, reeked of excrement. In this world, the man with the most degrading job held the most power, the groom of the king's close stool. This man who physically cleaned the king after every bowel movement was his most trusted confidant and de facto chief of staff. And the rot of the palace seeped outward, often disguised as charity, the horrifyingly true story of the Countess of Hanover who would soothe her syphilis-ravaged, sore-covered body in a bath of milk and then donate that same pus-contaminated, infectious liquid to the starving poor is the ultimate symbol of this world. It was a world of profound cognitive dissonance, a magnificently decorated lie where absolute power had bred absolute filth, and its inhabitants had learned to simply not see the decay they were wading through every single day.
Imagine you are a scholar physician in the city of Granada in the mid-15th century. You live in a world of stunning sophistication. The magnificent Alhambra Palace, a masterpiece of intricate tile work, soaring arches and flowing water, looms above the city on its hill. The streets are clean, lit by lamps at night. Your civilization has built aqueducts that carry fresh water from the mountains, libraries that hold the combined wisdom of the Greek, Roman, and Islamic worlds, and universities that teach advanced medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. You have studied the medical texts of Galen and Ibn Sina. You understand the clear and demonstrable link between public health and personal hygiene. Central to this understanding is the hammam, the public bathhouse. It is a cornerstone of your society, an architectural marvel, a place for ritual cleansing required by your faith, a center for business dealings, for political discussion, and for the simple, civilized maintenance of the health of the body and spirit. Your life is one of order, intellect,
and profound cleanliness. Then the world ends. The armies of the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, conquer your city after a long and bitter siege. The cross replaces the crescent atop the Alhambra. The Inquisition follows in their wake like a black shadow. And you discover, with a chilling horror that defies all logic and reason, that your conquerors are waging a holy war not just against your faith, but against the very concept of being clean. To them, your bathhouses are not centers of health. They are dens of sin. Your medical knowledge is not science. It is heresy. Your daily hygiene is seen as a decadent, sensual, and ungodly practice, proof of a corrupt soul. A new, harsh theology takes root, one born of early Christian desert ascetics who believed the body was a sinful vessel to be subdued and mortified. To them, embracing filth and suffering was the true path to God. And your conquerors believe this with the terrifying fervor of the newly victorious. The magnificent bathhouses, feats of engineering and art, are systematically demolished. A royal decree is issued forbidding bathing. Suddenly, soap is contraband. Owning a fine-toothed comb or a fresh towel is suspicious. The simple private act of washing your hands and face becomes a clandestine act of rebellion that could get you dragged before the Inquisition, tortured until you confessed to heresy, and then burned alive at the stake in a public spectacle called an auto da fe. This was directly tied to the infamous purity of blood laws. Cleanliness was considered a Moorish or Jewish trait, and therefore filth became a grotesque badge of Christian loyalty. The paranoia was suffocating. Neighbors informed on neighbors. Children were interrogated about their parents' washing habits. This twisted ideology was then exported as an instrument of empire. When Spanish ships reached the Americas, they were disgusted by the native people's blasphemous habit of daily bathing and quickly forbade it, forcing their own lethal filth upon a healthy population. This was not a slow slide into ignorance. It was a deliberate, violent, and systematic destruction of centuries of human progress in public health. It was a war against the body, a theology that demanded its followers prove their loyalty to God by embracing a state of squalor, turning the very idea of hygiene into a mortal sin.